afternoon to everybody. We are very happy and very grateful to be here in Villa San Remigio in Verbania on Lake Maggiore with Harald Pechlaner. He is professor of tourism and head of the Center for Entrepreneurship at the Catholic University of Eichstätt-Ingolstadt in Germany, and head of the Center for Advanced Studies of Eurac research in Italy. And it's very important for us because he's here as visiting professor within the project that is named NOTES, the Spoke Tree dedicated to industry of culture and tourism within the recovery plan, national plan for recovery and resilience. So I give the floor to Professor Harald Pechlaner, and thank you very much for coming and join us for this seminar today here.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. And a special thanks to Professor Stefania Cerutti for the invitation. I'd like very much to be here and to have an interesting discussion on a research level about culture and tourism related to the question whether there is a kind of cultural tourism, what it is, what the background is, what we need just in order to talk about cultural tourism. And this all in context of perspectives of cultural heritage and obviously, as mentioned before, the key term sustainability. So I'd like to give you an overview and hopefully I can give some insights and bring some relations between the different terms which are very often used in the industry of tourism, in the service industry as a whole, and obviously also in the sector of culture. So from that point of view, I like to start with some definitions about culture and tourism, talk about these so-called perspectives of cultural heritage and sustainability, followed by a discussion about cultural sustainability, and last but not least, cultural leadership. We are in the mountains and Piedmont, as many other regions in Italy and in Europe, are also regions related with issues to mountainous issues. Mountains are difficult on one hand, but are also fascinating areas. Very, very closely linked to the human being and to questions related to culture. So mountain and culture are good examples in the context of culture and tourism or cultural tourism. They are good examples and a good basis for the discussion of cultural heritage and sustainability. Indirectly, I will relate to questions related to the mountains. So there is a question whether sustainability and tourism, the two key terms, can relate. What is at stake? So we have different views and perspectives. We have different access, different ways how to see sustainability and tourism. There is no doubt that it is always critical to find one definition. I would say that there is no one definition for this relation between sustainability and tourism. This is because of the key term sustainability, which is related to many different objectives, especially objectives closely related to the Sustainable Development Goals defined by the United Nations. And when we talk about tourism, obviously also on the UN level, the United Nations World Tourism Organization is using this strong relation between the definition of sustainability on this global level on one hand and a definition about what tourism is also at a global level. But I will relate to that a little bit later. But looking at this picture, you see how difficult it is to have a clear definition about sustainable tourism, about sustainability and tourism, about the question whether tourism is related to more or less to sustainability, and last but not least, what is sustainability, or what sustainability is in that regard. We have many different examples of how sustainability and tourism can relate. There are some critical issues and there are some very positive relations between sustainability and tourism. You see here two examples which are related to critical issues. In these days, we are talking that much about over-tourism. This is an Italian case study of Praxaville, Lago di Braies, in the most northern province of Italy, the autonomous province of Alto Adige, South Tyrol, Süd Tyrol. This is not a discussion related exclusively to that region, but this is a discussion related to many regions in the world. So how many tourists are, from different point of view, acceptable for a region, acceptable for a place, and acceptable for a destination? There are some views and perspectives. So we talk about the psychological access to this discussion. So it's about a capacity, it's about a perception of capacities, especially looking at the local people. Local people normally have good relations with tourists visiting their regions, areas and places. But of course, if there are too many people, too many tourists in one place, this can create dissatisfaction. This can create, let me say, a negative effect on how perceive touristic development, how perceive the development of tourism as a whole. Yeah? So this is, from one point of view, a good example of a negative impact between sustainability and tourism, because on one hand we have tourism development, but on the other hand there is the question which is closely related to sustainability, whether there we have to define limits, what sustainability means. Is this related to specific products? Is the sustainability related to resources which we have or not have in let me say, enough, and so on and so far, just to give some examples about that. Let me just come to another discussion, which is of the same importance, or I would say even of a bigger importance, questions related to the carbon footprint, questions related to climate change, related to, and the consequences for the global, national, regional, and local tourism. This is only an example, and you see a slide with some figures showing us that emissions by mode of transport are heavily impacting on the question of the future development of tourism. When we see that airplanes are impacting in a different way than cars, motorcycles, trains, ferry boats, and so on. But this is only one small piece of discussion, of course. So climate change is related to different ways of how we can see the things and how we can interpret the situation in a place, and how potential strategies can be developed just in order to mitigate, or just in order to, let me say, have different developmental steps of that, what eventually we could, under this condition, call sustainable tourism. So definitely there is the question what sustainable tourism development is. Again, I come back to some examples I made right before. I mentioned right before, when we talk about effects, and these effects, which are different than when we look at the single areas, the single stages of life cycle, but also the single areas. We cannot combine destinations in the same way and with the same measures. Every destination has a very specific access to the discussion of sustainability and tourism. So we have some economic impacts, we have sociocultural impacts, and we have ecological impacts as well. This is a tripartition. This is a different. This is a definition which is crucial, which is well developed, which is well known all over the world, and so it is really helpful to discuss in that way. Even if, I will do that a bit later, with the cultural aspect, other views are coming through. Looking at the definition of the World Tourism Organization, so the UNWTO, tourism is sustainable when its present and future economic, social, and ecological impacts are fully considered and the needs of guests, the industry, the environment, and the local population are taken into account. This is a very general definition, of course. And this is a definition which is that broad that it is broad because it makes sense to create something more general, applicable, but more general, recognizable as a starting point for a discussion about how develop, how implement, how operationalize sustainability in the context of tourism and tourist destinations. In other words, sustainable tourism aims to reduce its negative impacts and increase its positive impacts. And this brings us to the discussion about the measurement of sustainability in tourism. More and more, this discussion is becoming important. There is a simple reason for. More and more, the world is becoming complex. It is definitely not easy to understand the complexity and the relations of different influential factors. So it is clear that more and more there is a need for evidence as a basis for strategic decisions. More and more there is a need for data, which can be the basis for the analysis and for a clearer empirical basis as an analysis, again, as a good basis for decisions. In what we need are indicators, so a set of information used to measure changes over time, for example, tourist arrivals, tourist-related CO2 emissions, and so on. The sustainable tourism indicators usually measure changes in tourism's own structures, changes in external factors affecting tourism, and impacts caused by tourism. So this brings us to the discussion about the monitoring system. We see that there is an interesting tendency to monitor more and more based on these indicators, the situation of tourism and the situation of tourism related to sustainability issues. So monitoring means systematically observing and evaluating a process or performance over time by using indicators, a set of indicators, and the evidence then should be context relevant and should be current in a certain way, just to have a good basis for the decisions. Well, this is then a good basis now for me to show you an example. Italians first and until now only monitoring system based on the UNWTO, so the World Tourism Organization, is in the field of tourism, is the so-called Sustainable Tourism Observatory of South Tyrol. Again, coming back to this case study, which is in my view interesting, first because I have done a lot of research in that region, and second because this region is a region with a certain level of tourism intensity, and tourism intensities, if they are high, you have obviously a lot of interesting discussions and perspectives, hopes and wishes in that regions about the future of tourism, and this is always a good basis for a critical view and for a monitoring system as well. So we have main objectives of this Sustainable Tourism Observatory South Tyrol, and there is clearly, first of all, a theoretical contribution to the conceptualization and measurement of sustainable tourism. And this monitoring system should support local DMOs and the regional government in developing policies, strategies, and management processes for sustainable tourism. So it's about reporting, it's about developing indicators, and it's about a networking. It's about networking different stakeholders, touristic stakeholders, but also non-touristic stakeholders, just in order to create a common sense of that what the future development of tourism in that specific region could or should be. It's more than just monitor and have indicators as a basic for the monitoring for decisions of single individuals or single organizations. It's about creating networks in the destination itself. And so you see here some examples. You have indicators related to the economic sustainability, such as employment, seasonality, economic benefits. Then aspects and indicators related to the social sustainability, such as governance, local and visitor satisfaction, or land use, landscape diversity. So in a perspective of societies, in a perspective of actors in the cultural, societal, or even economic context. And then you have indicators related to water and wastewater management, energy management, waste management, nature conservation. So all in all, indicators strongly related to that what we call ecological sustainability, or the sustainability related to the environmental context. Well, and then there is also a discussion about culture. What has culture to do with the sustainable tourism issue? I will come back to that a bit later. Just to give you some examples, as I mentioned before, South Tyrol is a good case study for the tourism development discussion, because there is a certain tourism intensity. The intensity which is related to, let me say, overnight stays and the the numbers of population. This is one aspect. Another indicator is related to nature conservation. So related to specific contexts of nature parks, for example. We all know that nature parks, regional nature parks, or even national parks are contributing in an effective way to questions related to nature conservation. So from that point of view, it is really, really important to have good data from them and to create data for them. So just to have an idea how nature parks, how national parks can be a driving force for the development of the region, just showing the importance of nature, just showing the importance of nature conservation as a conceptual pillar of the development of a whole region in itself. Moving a little bit to other questions, when we talk about cultural heritage, you see here a picture, on one hand, a castle. Castles are artifacts of culture and are considered important aspects of cultural heritage. Tangible heritage, tangible cultural heritage. And on the other hand, you see here just an example of a traditional carnival, which is a good example for an intangible cultural heritage. What we need when we talk about cultural tourism, when we talk about sustainable tourism, what we need is to know about the difference of tangible and intangible artifacts and cultural artifacts. And what we need is a contextualization. So in other words, we need a clear picture of the importance of these artifacts for the development of places, for the development of regions, for the development of identities in the regions, and for the development of the perspectives of tourism. So how do visitors, how do guests, and how do tourists see these artifacts? Is this in line with the identity of the local population? And I would say the better these perceptions are related to the perceptions of local population, the easier it is to develop in the context of culture and tourism, sustainability and tourism, these products, and allow me to say these experiences. And so allow me to move now to questions related to cultural sustainability. Well, at the beginning of my talk, was bringing the discussion of mountains. Mountains are fascinating, but it isn't easy to live in mountains. And we have so many mountainous regions all over the world. The Alps in Europe are only one important alpine or mountain range. Meanwhile, we have mountains in Asia, in the Americas, which are quite important for the ecosystem, but which are also quite important for, let me say, the development of regions, the regional development, and the touristic development as well. Allow me to show you a picture and then also a quote. Sustainability, I can't hear the word anymore. We all know this is a buzzword, and we all have this responsibility to fill sustainability also with a specific content which is related to something serious, something which can create impact in a place or impact in a network. And when I see a picture like this, with these incredible steep slopes, I think of the many centuries in which people didn't even know the word, but really lived like this. Well, live in the mountains is closely related to sustainability, because people in the mountains, they have a high sensitivity for resources. What are the resources they have? What are the resources they can consume? And what are the resources they have to keep just in order to survive in the mountains? People in the mountains normally have, as I mentioned before, a high sensitivity for these questions. And people in the mountains normally are very close to nature, very close to nature resources, and very, very close to the questions how we have to conserve the nature, how we have to conserve the mountains just in order to make it possible to survive, and beyond the question of survival, how to live and how create quality of life in the mountains. So therefore, allow me to bring this, since it is also an important question for the research team of Professor Cerutti, working at this university in Novara, Vercelli, and Verbania, also in the field of mountain tourism, which I think is an important research field, since it can give us some advice for questions related to sustainability in the near future. Therefore, I move back to the central question, what culture is. There are different views. Just in a very, very short way, 3 different views. There is an anthropological understanding, when we talk about sharing specific characteristics, way of life, a set of values and norms. Well, people in the mountains, in villages, up in the mountains, have normally this to share similar values, because otherwise they would say, well, let's have it in an easier way. Let's go down to the valley. Let's move to the big cities. Let's create a different lifestyle or use a different lifestyle. So everyone, it doesn't matter whether in the mountains or in bigger cities, whether in the rural landscapes or in the urbanized areas, can share eventually specific characteristics. Then there is, as I mentioned before, the cultural expression and heritage. Tangible culture, I show the castles, or the intangible culture. I showed the expressions of people, for example, experiencing traditional carnival in different regions. And last but not least, the identity. Culture is the sticking glue between individuals and collectivities. So collectivities in terms of networks, of communities. Communities are creating the spaces for that what eventually can then also be the expression, the cultural expression. It doesn't matter whether in a tangible or intangible way. And so this brings me again to the global level. In this way, the UNESCO, which distinguishes 5 areas of intangible culture: orally transmitted traditions and expressions, including language as a bearer of intangible cultural heritage, performing arts, social customs, rituals and festivals, knowledge and customs related to nature, the universe, and last but not least, traditional handicraft techniques. I will then show you why I need these definitions as a basis for the further discussions. So the roles of cultures for sustainability are to see on different levels: perceptions, values and beliefs, behavior and social relations, communication, language and symbols, artifacts, art, or even cultural heritage. So culture and cultures can have a very, very important role for the definition of sustainability. And the other way around, sustainability is culture or can be culture when it comes to expressions. And again, it doesn't matter whether in a tangible or intangible way. The cultural sustainability is, in that context, something important in my view. Culture first as a pillar of sustainability. We should, from that point of view, include culture in this three-pillar model of sustainability. I will show it later. And then make the question how to achieve cultural sustainability. First, developing the cultural sector. Second, ensuring that culture is part of public policies. When we look at education, that's the reason why this is important then for UNESCO. Economy, science, research, communication, the environment, social cohesion, and or international cooperation. And so, when we go back to this three-pillar model, we can eventually think on a four-pillar model of sustainability, including culture. You see here culture in sustainability, so just expanding the three-pillar model. Culture for sustainability, which is also then the basis for the three-pillar model, or culture as sustainability. I think there are different views how we can create this link and this interface between culture and sustainability. My central message is that sustainability can become culture. And the other way around, culture and sustainability are then a good basis, for example, tourism development, and for the sustainable tourism development, and obviously then also for the development of cultural tourism. But what we need is a new perspective and view on culture as a basis for this discussion. Let me now make some examples. And again, I remain in the mountains. I remain in the Alps, in the alpine tourism. And again, this case study of South Tyrol, which can also be a good case study for other mountainous regions. We have here just a cultural expression. This is a traditional dance of local populations in a specific alpine region. Well, we have other pictures here. This is the expression. This is a kind of harvesting festival on the left-hand side. On the right side, you see a lot of people waiting that they can visit the museum. This is a famous museum in the city of Bolzano, Bozen in South Tyrol, where the man from the ice, the so-called man from the ice, over 5,000 years old, can be visited and showed by people visiting this provincial archaeological museum of Bolzano, Bozen. On one hand, we have this strong tourism focus, and on the other hand, we have this cultural focus with different views on the relation of culture and tourism. There are some questions. For example, looking at this event, was this event created for tourists, or was this event created from the local population for the local population, just as an expression of let me say, cultural identity of a region? On the other hand, what is the role of specific museums? Especially when it comes to questions related to culture. Museums are always closely related to culture. Museums are expressions of culture. They have very, very specific roles and tasks to fulfill. And in what way do they have a touristic function in that regard? So all in all, it is about sociocultural effects of tourism. It's about the preservation of culture. There are obviously positive effects on the quality of life of residents, positive effects on local identity. There are even the potentials of transformative experiences for tourists. So what they can learn something, they can reflect about that, what they learned, and they can make them an important, substantial part of their life, and the contribution to intercultural understanding. So, in other words, also, for example, overcoming cultural shocks. But then there are also some negative effects. For example, the negative impact on the quality of life of residents, the commercialization and homogenization of culture, especially because of this obviously pressure of tourism, when tourism is becoming more important by numbers in specific regions. This obviously is creating a kind of culture which is eventually less and less authentic, but in the other way, also a more homogeneous expression of culture. The cultural appropriation or the authenticity, and that's what I mentioned before, the manipulation of the authenticity. What is authentic, what not? Is the original the authentic one, or is authentic that what we perceive as authentic? So if tourists do not know about the original one, which is that what eventually local population perceive as authentic, well, then tourists would perceive eventually even a copy as authentic. This is a question which is so important for future tourism development discussions, but this is obviously also important for the perception of culture, especially on a global level. Asian populations and cultures have partially a different view on that what was an authentic expression of culture is. That was a question related to culture and tourism can be then, for example, European cultures or others. Let me come to an end with an interesting example. Again, remaining in the Alps and looking at an interesting cultural expression which has a so long tradition, and for hundreds of years, I would say, this tradition was not known, especially not known to visitors and tourists. And only in the last years, this culture became known, became important for tourists. And today, there is the central question whether we are able to connect tourism and culture, and sustainability in a way that it can be interesting for the development of the region, for the development of cultures and their expressions, and obviously for the sustainable development of cultural tourism itself. Before we do that, allow me to show you an overview, or give you an overview about transhumance. Transhumance describes the seasonal movement of livestock from one area to another in order to adapt to seasonal availability of grazing land. In alpine regions, herds remain in seasonal mountain pastures during summer to escape the dry heat and which frees space for other cultivating activities in the valley. They then descend to lower pastures during the cold months. And with its long-lasting roots in alpine history, transhumance has a lasting historic influence on economic, cultural, social, and ethical aspects of life. In 2019, transhumans was included in the UNESCO representative list of intangible cultural heritage, with special consideration to these transhumans, which I now show you, between Italy and Austria in the so-called Valley of Schnalztal, Valsenales, in South Tyrol, Italy, where, agricultural people bring their livestock from South Tyrol to North Tyrol in Austria, and the way back in the autumn. Just show you some pictures, and you see that more and more tourists are then going up in that regions just to visit, just to follow the livestock moving from one area to the other area. Behind you see touristic expressions, for example, a lift or cable car. But it's interesting that more and more tourists, interesting people, I would say, are following this let me say, livestock and to the pastures. So the cultural sustainability from the local perspective is the question related to the example of transhumans in South Tyrol. And researchers of Eurac in Bolzano-Bozen, they made a research, they made some interviews, and they compared the interviews of the Valsenales Schnalztal with others in Selva di Val Gardena, Wolkenstein in the Gardena Valley, again in South Tyrol, but in a different mountainous region called Dolomites. And the findings, they were just interesting to know about these relations of culture, agriculture, and tourism. They use GABEC method. They created networks, and they, with this GABEC method, they were able to graphically represent the text as networks and show the network graph. I will show that now with this key term transhumans. So what is transhumans? Now, just to give you an example, this is the method, and here you see the findings. Transhumans is seen as an event, as an experience. It's closely related to questions of the UNESCO World Cultural Heritage. People know about that, and UNESCO Cultural Heritage is obviously an attraction in itself, and it's creating attractiveness. More and more people see that then also this touristic character of this event. When we move to the question related to the key term of tourism, so then you see it's about tradition on one hand, the festivity, the event on the other hand, but it's about questions also close to balance finding, which shows us that there is a certain need for sustainability. Tourism should benefit, but associations, so in other words, cultural expressions of the local population should be included in that, just to show also the tradition. So how explain others, visitors, for example, or tourists, the traditional side of the traditional aspect of this festivity, of this cultural expression. Going forward, researchers showed the aspect of associations. So local associations have always been part of our community, and they want to take care of the preservation of its traditions all. Yeah? Or another interview part, the preservation of culture as such is very important, but nowadays it's really difficult to excite the younger generation for it because it means a lot of work and efforts. So it's about conservation on one hand, but it's about of development of the cultural expression also related to newer generations. Just coming to an end, there are some preliminary findings, key findings in both municipalities. Transhumanism is perceived as an important tradition. Tourism has an impact on the scale of the festivity in both the municipalities. And in recent years, marketing efforts have been intensified with more and more tourists joining each year. So, in other words, also touristic responsibles and managers have to make the question and put the question, how long should we make marketing for these events just in order to keep the authenticity, especially for the local population? Yeah? Because this is not an exclusively touristic event. Sheep are moving from one valley to another, not for touristic reasons. They do it for clear economic reasons, for agricultural reasons. And this created a culture, and this created a sense of sustainability. And regarding the impact of tourism on local culture in general, opinions differ. This is also a key finding of this small research. Representatives from the tourism sectors downplay tourism's negative impact on culture and underline the positive aspects. Cultural experts and especially farmers criticize tourism as exploiting traditions and customs and making it a show solely for the tourists. So it is, you see, difficult. You have to keep a balance. And keeping a balance means creating sustainability. Local associations are seen as the most important conveyor of local practices. So we have to include and involve local associations even more in the near future. But local associations need members, and the members are coming from the locals. And they are only joining these local associations if they have a sense of identity. So coming back to the discussions which I made right before. The local challenges in Valsenales are, just to be sure, that the mass event has to come back to a certain balance. All the stakeholders are seeing the importance, and I would say also the agricultural sector is not against tourism, definitely not, but they are against of too much tourism. They are against of mass tourism events. There is a need for an instrument to protect the tradition and manage the event in the same way. So what we need is a kind of code of conduct. And so researchers at Eurac started to create a code of conduct, and they did it just for several reasons. Inform, educate, sensitize, but also promote, steer, prevent, and maintain. So we have different levels. And you see, all these levels, at the end of the day, are levels which help to increase the sustainability and the sense of sustainability. In other words, it is about the culture of sustainability. And well, there are some target groups of the code of conduct. And then there is a question how to create a code of conduct. Well, there is a certain language of a code of conduct. Use easy language, and people are more likely to protect places to which they have an emotional connection. And they are more successful when formulated positively and action-oriented. And they did a really interesting research, creating this, let me say, common sense about sustainability and culture and identity in the context of local stakeholders networks. mapping behaviors as a basis for a code of conduct. I think it could eventually be also an interesting example for other regions too, talking about nature and environment, talking about economy and regional supply chains, talking about communication, governance, safety, and last but not least, cultural and social impacts. So from that point of view, a code of conduct isn't that bad and could be an instrument for better understanding between different stakeholders, in this specific case, between the agricultural sector and the touristic sector, which is so important as a strong link for the development of the mountainous regions. Where we need all the stakeholders just in order to create something important. In other words, it is about supporting local stakeholders in the implementation of this code of conduct, and is about measuring and analyzing the impact of a code of conduct by including the main target groups. So coming to an end, finally, just a couple of minutes, then I should definitely come to an end. Bringing together culture, sustainability, and tourism needs a certain leadership. It is much more than just creating a management system. It is about ethical attitude, it is about empowerment, but it's also about self-confidence, integrity. It is about respect for people, but it's also about courage to do something which brings us forward in this very, very specific world. There is an emergence of leadership. On one hand, a trade leadership, so bringing out these values, as I mentioned before, such as respect and ethical issues, but also a process leadership. The process of development, the process of discussion, the discussion of a code of conduct, which I showed is a good example of a kind of process leadership. And so I would say leadership exerts influence on others, but in the same way we create an idea which can be shared by a community. So leadership is not that much related to one single person in my perspective, but much more to a community. Communities should develop their own leadership, and then they have a good basis for the development of culture, sustainability, and tourism. So I would say I should definitely come to an end. I promised it several times, but now I end with my presentation. Again, just summarizing a little bit, we need a new leadership bringing together culture and tourism, discussing the basis of culture, and linking culture and sustainability. You remember, I showed you 3 levels of relations between culture and sustainability. It is about culture in sustainability, it is about culture for sustainability, and it's about culture as sustainability. I hope that I gave you some interesting insights for different perspectives. I related my discussion a bit closer to alpine and mountain regions, but nevertheless, mountain leadership can always be a good basis for the discussion and implementation of these ideas also in other regions. From that point of view, Thank you very much, and I give back to Professor Cerutti.
Yeah, thank you very much to you, Professor Harald Pechlaner, because you just gave us a sort of broad scenario or a sort of broad, fresco about what can be the relationship between culture, sustainability, and tourism. And you've just talked about the code of conduct. Maybe it's also a sort of code of thinking about the development, especially within the mountain areas or the local system of tourism, of minor or little areas such as the Alpine Mountains within the province of Verbania, where we are now located. And it's very important for us because I think that we have a really, a real challenge because you talk about to keep a balance, and it's very important, I think. And it is very strictly connected to another point that you touched just a few minutes ago, that is to find a new lever for tourist development that needs a new leadership and capability of local governance. So I think that it's a very challenge because we need to preserve culture, to know about this, to deepen our knowledges, but at the same time, we need an other point of views, other perspective to make values through culture. So thank you very much for your suggestion from the Center Study Upontourism and the University of Piedmont Orientale, for my department for sustainability development and also ecological transition by San Remigio. And so we are very, very happy to have hosted you here today. Thank you.
Thank you.